The morning sun was just starting to peek over the Texas horizon when Rebecca heard it. A low, painful sound that didn't belong to any animal she knew. She paused at the well, the wooden bucket halfway down into the dark water below. There it was again. Like someone trying not to cry out? But failing. Rebecca had been living alone on this patch of land for 8 months now, ever since her husband died from fever. At 23, she knew the dangers of frontier life better than most. Wild animals, harsh weather, and sometimes worse things roamed these parts. But something about this sound made her heart race in a different way. She pulled the bucket back up and set it aside. The noise was coming from the thick brush beyond her small garden, maybe 50 yards away. Every sensible thought in her head told her to go back inside, bar the door, and wait for whatever it was to move on, but Rebecca had never been one to ignore suffering. She walked slowly toward the sound, her boots crunching on the dry grass. The Texas heat was already building, even though it was barely past dawn. Sweat began to form on her forehead as she pushed through the mesquite bush and prickly pear. The sounds grew clearer now. Definitely human. Someone was in serious trouble. Rebecca pushed aside a large branch and stepped into a small clearing. What she saw made her freeze completely. A young Native American man sat on the ground, his right leg caught in a cruel steel trap. The metal teeth had bitten deep into his flesh just above the ankle. Dark stains covered the ground around him, and his face was pale with pain and exhaustion. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rebecca had heard all the stories about the Comanche raids, the burned homesteads, the families that disappeared in the night. Every settler in this part of Texas knew to fear the sound of war whoops and thundering horses, but this man wasn't raiding anyone. He was trapped, hurt, and probably dying. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Not anger or hatred, but a kind of resigned acceptance. Like he had been waiting for death and wasn't surprised it had come. Wearing the face of a white woman, Rebecca took a step closer, and the man tried to back away. The movement made him wince in pain, and fresh blood seeped from the wound. The trap was old and rusty, the kind bounty hunters sometimes set for wolves. But everyone knew they caught more than just animals. She held up her hands, palms out, trying to show she meant no harm. The man watched her carefully, his breathing shallow and quick. He was young, maybe her age or a little older. His long black hair was matted with sweat, and traditional Comanche clothing marked him as a warrior. "I'm not going to hurt you," Rebecca said softly. Even though she knew he probably didn't understand English, the man's eyes never left her face. As she slowly knelt down beside the trap. Up close, she could see how bad the wound really was. The metal had cut deep, and the leg was badly swollen. He had been here for hours, maybe all night. Rebecca had some experience with injuries from taking care of her husband during his final illness. This man would lose his leg, maybe his life, if he didn't get help soon. She pointed to the trap, and then to herself, trying to communicate that she wanted to help. The man shook his head weakly and said something in his own language. His voice was hoarse from pain and thirst. "Water," Rebecca said, pointing to her cabin and making drinking motions. "Food, help." The man studied her face for a long moment. Rebecca could see the conflict in his eyes. Everything in his world told him not to trust her, just like everything in her world told her to run away. But here they were, two people caught between hatred and humanity. Finally, the man gave a small nod. Rebecca stood up carefully, not wanting to startle him. "I'll be right back," she said. "Don't try to move." She hurried back to her cabin, her mind racing. What was she doing? If anyone found out she was helping a Comanche warrior, they would call her a traitor. Some might even come after her themselves, but Rebecca had been raised to believe that suffering was suffering. No matter who was doing it, she gathered everything she could think of. Water, of course. Some leftover cornbread from yesterday, clean cloth for bandages, her husband's tools from the shed. The trap looked old, but the spring mechanism would still be strong. She would need a crowbar and some wire cutters. When she returned to the clearing, the man was still there. His eyes had closed, but they opened when he heard her footsteps. Rebecca set down her supplies and offered him the water first. He drank deeply, water running down his chin. Color began to return to his face and his breathing became steadier. When he finished drinking, he looked at Rebecca with something that might have been gratitude. Now came the hard part. Rebecca examined the trap carefully. The spring was indeed powerful, designed to hold a struggling wolf or coyote. She would need to pry it open while being careful not to cause more damage to the wounded leg. She showed the man her tools and tried to explain what she planned to do. He seemed to understand and braced himself against a nearby tree. Rebecca positioned the crowbar against the trap's spring mechanism and began to apply pressure. The metal was stubborn and corroded. Sweat poured down her face as she struggled with the rusty mechanism. The man tried to help by pulling on the other side of the trap, but his strength was nearly gone. After what felt like hours, Rebecca heard a loud crack. The spring gave way, and the trap's jaws opened enough to free the injured leg. The man immediately pulled his foot clear and collapsed backward against the tree. Rebecca quickly examined the wound. It was bad, but not as bad as she had feared. The bone didn't seem to be broken, though the flesh was torn and bleeding. She tore her spare cloth into strips and began cleaning and bandaging the injury. As she worked, the man watched her face. Once, he reached out and gently touched her hand as if to say thank you. Rebecca looked up and smiled, and for a moment, the fear and suspicion between them seemed to disappear. When the bandaging was finished, Rebecca helped the man to his feet. He couldn't put weight on the injured leg, but he could hobble with support. Together, they made the slow journey back to her cabin. Rebecca knew she was taking an enormous risk. But as she helped the wounded warrior through her door, she also knew she couldn't have done anything else. Some things were more important than fear. Some things were more important than the color of a person's skin or the language they spoke. Sometimes, being human was the only thing that mattered. Getting the wounded warrior inside her cabin was harder than Rebecca had expected. Every step was a struggle, and by the time they reached her door, both of them were exhausted. The man's breathing came in short gasps, and she could feel him. Shaking from pain and weakness, Rebecca helped him sit down on the wooden chair beside her small kitchen table. The cabin felt different now with someone else inside. For months, it had been just her and the memories of her late husband. Now there was a stranger here, someone who could be her enemy or her salvation. The warrior looked around the small room with careful eyes. He took in everything: the rifle mounted above the fireplace, the kitchen knives on the counter, the back door that led to the garden. Even wounded and weak, his mind was working like a soldier's. Rebecca watched him studying her home and felt a chill of fear. What if this was all a mistake? What if helping him only put her in more danger? But then she saw him wince as he tried to shift his position, and her doubts faded. Pain was pain. Suffering was suffering. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. "Let me look at that leg again," she said gently, kneeling down beside his chair. The warrior tensed up and pulled back. His hand moved instinctively toward where his knife would have been, but the weapon was gone. Probably lost when he got caught in the trap. Rebecca raised her hand slowly, the same gesture she had used in the clearing. "It's okay," she said. "I just want to help." She pointed to the bandage, then to herself, then made cleaning motions with her hands. The warrior watched her carefully, trying to understand. His dark eyes were alert despite his exhaustion, and Rebecca could see the intelligence behind them. Slowly, he nodded and allowed her to examine the wound. The bleeding had slowed, but the injury was still serious. The bandage was already soaked through with blood and would need to be changed. Rebecca went to her medicine box and pulled out the herbs and remedies she had learned to use during her husband's illness. As she prepared a cleaning solution, the warrior spoke. His voice was weak but firm, and though Rebecca couldn't understand the words, she could hear the question in his tone. "You want to know why I'm helping you," she said, not looking up from her work. "I'm not sure I know myself." The warrior tilted his head, listening to the sound of her voice even though the words meant nothing to him. Rebecca sat back on her heels and looked at him directly. "My husband used to say that you could judge a person by how they treated someone who couldn't help them back." She gestured to his injured leg. "Right now, you can't hurt me even if you wanted to. And I can't gain anything by helping you, so maybe this is just about doing what's right." The warrior watched her lips as she spoke, trying to pick up any words he might recognize. Rebecca had heard that some of the younger Comanche knew a little English from trading with settlers and captured whites. She tried a different approach. Pointing to herself, she said clearly, "Rebecca." The warrior studied her face for a moment, then pointed to his own chest. "Q," he said slowly. Rebecca repeated the name, trying to get the pronunciation right. "Q." He nodded approvingly. And for the first time since she found him, something like a smile crossed his face. "Q," Rebecca said again, then pointed to his leg. She made washing motions and tried to look reassuring. This time, when she reached for the bandage, Q didn't pull away. Rebecca carefully unwrapped the blood-soaked cloth and examined the wound in better light. It was deep and ugly, but she had seen worse during the war when wounded soldiers sometimes made it to their farm. She began cleaning the injury with gentle, practiced movements. Q gripped the sides of his chair and breathed deeply, but he didn't cry out. Rebecca had to admire his strength. She had seen grown men scream from lesser injuries. As she worked, Rebecca found herself talking to fill the silence. "You're probably wondering if I'm going to turn you in for the bounty," she said, applying fresh herbs to the wound. "The truth is, I need you gone before anyone finds out you're here, but not until you're strong enough to travel." Q watched her face intently as she spoke. There was something in his expression that made Rebecca think he understood more than he was letting on. "Can you understand me?" she asked, pausing in her work. Q was quiet for a long moment. Then very slowly he said, "Little." Rebecca's heart jumped. He did know some English. "How much is little?" "Words," Q said carefully. "Some words." "Good," Rebecca said, relieved. "That makes this easier." She finished bandaging his leg with clean cloth and sat back. "Better?" she asked. "Q." You moved his foot carefully and nodded. "Better," he agreed. Rebecca stood up and went to her pantry. She pulled out some dried meat, bread, and a jar of preserves. The warrior needed food to regain his strength, and she needed to figure out what to do next. As she prepared a plate, her mind raced through the possibilities. If anyone from town came by and found Q here, it would mean trouble for both of them. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, but people did sometimes ride through her property on their way to the river. She set the food down in front of Q and watched him eat. He was hungry but careful, eating slowly and watching her at the same time. Trust was still a fragile thing between them. "Where is your tribe?" Rebecca asked. Q paused mid-bite and looked at her suspiciously. "I'm not going to tell anyone," Rebecca said quickly. "I just need to know how long before they come looking for you." Q thought for a moment, then held up 3 fingers. 3 days?" Rebecca asked. He nodded. 3 days. That wasn't much time. If his people came looking and found him here, they might not understand that she had helped him. They might see only a white woman who had taken their warrior prisoner. The other hand, if she sent him away too soon, he might not make it back to his tribe alive. The wound was serious, and he had lost a lot of blood. Rebecca made her decision. "You stay here tonight," she said. "Rest. Tomorrow we see how you feel." Q finished eating and leaned back in his chair. The food and medical attention had brought some color back to his face, but he was still very weak. "Thank you," he said quietly in English. The words were simple, but Rebecca could hear the weight behind them. In his world, accepting help from an enemy was probably seen as weakness. But he had done it anyway, just as she had chosen to give it. "You're welcome," Rebecca replied. As evening fell over the Texas prairie, Rebecca prepared a makeshift bed for Q on the floor near the fireplace. She gave him blankets and checked his bandage one more time before retiring to her own room. But sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake listening to every sound, wondering if she had made the right choice. In the morning, everything would look different. But for tonight, she had saved a life. That had to count for something. Rebecca woke up before dawn, just as she had every morning for the past 8 months, but this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. She lay still for a moment, listening. From the main room came the sound of slow, steady breathing. Q was still alive, still sleeping. That was good. She had worried all night that his injuries might be worse than she thought. Quietly, she got dressed and tiptoed to her bedroom door. Through the crack, she could see him lying on the makeshift bed by the fireplace. Even in sleep, his face showed pain. His injured leg was positioned carefully, and she could see dark stains where blood had seeped through the bandage during the night. Rebecca made her way to the kitchen as quietly as possible. She needed to prepare fresh bandages and check his wound. But first, she would start a small fire and make some healing tea from the herbs in her garden. As she moved around the kitchen, gathering supplies, she heard Q stir. By the time she turned around, he was awake and watching her. "Good morning," she said softly. Q tried to sit up, then winced and fell back down. The movement sent fresh pain through his injured leg. "Don't move too fast," Rebecca said, hurrying over to him. "Let me help." She knelt beside him and carefully helped him into a sitting position. His forehead was damp with sweat, and she could feel fever building in his body. "How do you feel?" she asked. You thought for a moment, searching for the right English words. "Bad," he said finally. "Leg dire," Rebecca nodded. She had expected this. Wounds like his almost always developed fever and infection. The next few days would be critical. "I need to clean it again," she said, pointing to his leg. Q understood and nodded, though she could see he wasn't looking forward to it. Rebecca brought over her supplies and began unwrapping the bandage. The wound looked worse than yesterday. The flesh around the injury was swollen and angry red. She could see signs of infection starting to set in, working as gently as she could. Rebecca cleaned the wound with hot water and the strongest medicine she had. Q gripped a piece of wood between his teeth to keep from crying out, but sweat poured down his face from the pain. "I know it hurts," Rebecca said as she worked, "but we have to keep it clean." When she finished, she applied fresh herbs and wrapped the leg in clean cloth. Q was exhausted from the ordeal and lay back down immediately. "You need food," Rebecca said. "And water, lots of water." She brought him soup made from the last of her winter vegetables and watched him eat slowly. His appetite was poor, but he forced himself to finish most of it. Throughout the morning, Rebecca tended to her normal chores while keeping an eye on her patient. She fed the chickens, tended her small garden, and checked the perimeter of her property. Everything looked normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By afternoon, Q's fever had gotten worse. He drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes mumbling words in his native language. During his more lucid moments, Rebecca tried to communicate with him. "Tell me about your family," she said while changing his bandage for the third time that day. Q looked at her with unfocused eyes. "Family? Your people. Your tribe. Do you have a wife? Children?" Understanding dawned in his face. He held up one finger. "Brother," he said. Then he made a sweeping gesture with his arm. "Band, 20.25. "Your brother leads the band?" Rebecca asked. Q nodded. "Strong leader, good warrior." "He'll come looking for you," Rebecca said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Q agreed. "He come." That evening, as Rebecca prepared another dose of fever-reducing tea, Q spoke up from his bed. "Why?" he asked. Rebecca looked up from her work. "Why what? Why you help?" His English was getting clearer as he felt more comfortable speaking it. "Your people ... enemies." Rebecca set down her teacup and thought about how to answer. It was a fair question, and she wasn't sure she had a good answer. "My husband," she said finally. "Before he died, he told me something. He said, the only way to win a war is to stop fighting it." Q frowned, trying to understand. "I think he meant that hatred only breeds more hatred," Rebecca continued. "Someone has to choose to do something different." "Dangerous choice," Q said. "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "Very dangerous." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the wind was picking up, and Rebecca could hear her chickens settling in for the night. "My wife," Q said suddenly. Rebecca looked at him with surprise. He hadn't mentioned a wife before. "She died," he continued. "Last winter, sickness?" "I'm sorry," Rebecca said. Q nodded. "She ... kind, like you, help anyone who hurt. What was her name?" "Ayana," Q said, and his voice grew soft. Mean eternal blossom? Rebecca could hear the love and loss in his voice. She sounds wonderful. She. Say same thing like your husband, Q continued. Say hatred like poison. Kill the one who carries it. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. Two people from completely different worlds, and yet they had shared the same wisdom. The second. Day passed much like the first. Rebecca tended to Q's wound, gave him medicine for the fever, and tried to keep him comfortable. But by evening she was starting to worry. The infection wasn't getting better, and his fever remained high. That night, Q became delirious. He tossed and turned on his makeshift bed, speaking rapidly in Comanche. Sometimes he seemed to be having conversations with people who weren't there. Other times he appeared to be reliving battles or hunts. Rebecca stayed up all night cooling his forehead with damp cloths and making sure he didn't hurt himself. She had seen this kind of fever before. Sometimes people recovered. Sometimes they didn't. On the third morning, Q's fever finally broke. Rebecca woke up slumped in a chair beside his bed to find him looking at her with clear, alert eyes. You stayed, he said. Of course I stayed, Rebecca replied, stretching her sore back. You could have left me. Let the fever take me. Rebecca shook her head. I don't give up on people. Q studied her face for a long moment. You are not like other whites I have known. You're not like other Comanche I've heard about either, Rebecca said with a small smile. For the first time since she had found him, Q laughed. It was a weak sound, but genuine. Perhaps, he said, our people know only stories, not truth, Rebecca nodded. Perhaps. That afternoon, as Rebecca checked his wound, she was pleased to see that the infection was finally starting to clear. The angry redness was fading and the swelling had gone down. It's healing, she told him. You're going to be okay. Q flexed his foot carefully and nodded. Strong medicine woman, he said. Just someone who's seen a lot of hurt, Rebecca replied. The day wore on. Q grew stronger. He was able to sit up for longer periods and even managed to stand. Briefly, with Rebecca's help, his appetite returned and color began to come back to his face, but both of them knew that time was running out. 3 days had passed since Rebecca found him. His brother and the war band would be coming soon. Tomorrow, Q said that evening. I must go tomorrow. Rebecca nodded, though part of her felt sad about his leaving. Despite everything, she had enjoyed having someone to talk to again. Will you make it back to your people? She asked. Yes, Q said confidently. Legs strong enough now. That night, as they shared what might be their last meal together, both Rebecca and Q felt the weight of what was about to end. They had shared something rare, a moment of understanding between two worlds that were supposed to be enemies. Neither of them knew that this wouldn't be the last time they saw each other. The fourth morning came too soon. Rebecca woke to find Q already awake, sitting on the edge of his makeshift bed and testing his injured leg. The early light streaming through her window showed that he looked stronger than he had in days. How does it feel? She asked, sitting up in her chair where she had dozed off again. Q put some weight on the leg and nodded slowly. Better, much better. Rebecca felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because he was healing well enough to travel. Sadness because she knew what this meant. You're leaving today, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Q replied. Must go. My brother ... He worry, Rebecca understood. She had been worrying too, but for different reasons. Every day that Q stayed increased the chance that someone would discover him here. And that would be dangerous for both of them. Let me check the wound one more time, she said. Q unwrapped the bandage himself this time. The injury looked much better. The infection was gone and healthy pink skin was beginning to form around the edges of the wound. It would scar, but he would keep his leg and his life. You did good work, Q said, watching her examine his leg. We both did, Rebecca replied. You're strong. Stronger than most men I've known. She rewrapped his leg with fresh bandages, knowing it would probably be the last time. As she worked, both of them seemed to be thinking about what came next. Will you be safe traveling alone? Rebecca asked. Know this land well, Q said. Grow up here, these hills, these rivers, like old friends. Rebecca had lived here for over a year, but she knew her knowledge of the terrain was nothing compared to his. The Comanche had roamed these plains for generations. This was their home in a way it could never be hers. When she finished with the bandage, Rebecca went to her pantry and began packing food for his journey: dried meat, hardtack, and a small bag of cornmeal. It wasn't much, but it would keep him fed until he reached his people. "You don't have to do this," Q said, watching her work. "Yes, I do," Rebecca replied. "It's a long way to wherever you're going." She also filled a water skin and gathered some of the healing herbs that had helped fight his infection. "In case the wound gives you trouble," she explained. Q watched her preparations with growing emotion. "I cannot repay this kindness?" he said. "I don't want repayment," Rebecca said. "I just want you to make it home safely." As the morning progressed, they both began to feel the weight of their approaching separation. Over the past few days they had shared stories, learned each other's languages, and discovered that they had more in common than either had expected. "Tell me about your home," Rebecca said as they shared one last meal together. Q's eyes grew. "Distant, beautiful place, valley with good grass for horses. Clear stream runs through center. In spring, flowers everywhere. Yellow, red, purple." "It sounds wonderful," Rebecca said. "Your people would call it wilderness," Q said with a slight smile. "No houses, no roads, just freedom." Rebecca tried to imagine it. She had spent her whole life around farms and towns, places where humans had shaped the land to their needs. The idea of living so close to nature both frightened and fascinated her. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The simple life, I mean, before all the fighting started." Q was quiet for a long time. "Every day," he said finally. "But cannot go back, world changed, must change with it or die." After they finished eating, Q began to prepare for his departure. Rebecca had found some of her late husband's clothes that might fit him. The traditional Comanche clothing he had been wearing was torn and blood-stained. "Might be safer," suggested. "If anyone sees you from a distance, they might think you're just a drifter." Q understood the wisdom in this, though Rebecca could see it bothered him to give up his traditional dress. He was sacrificing part of his identity for safety. The clothes were a bit loose, but they would do. When he was dressed, Rebecca almost didn't recognize him. With his long hair hidden under her husband's old hat, he could pass for a Mexican cowhand or a half-breed trader. "Strange feeling," Q said, looking down at himself. "You're still you underneath," Rebecca said. "Clothes don't change who you are." As the sun reached its peak, both of them knew it was time. Q needed to travel during the day to make good progress, but he also needed to be far from Rebecca's homestead before nightfall. Rebecca walked with him to the edge of her property. The place where her small garden ended and the wild prairie began seemed like the border between two different worlds. "Which way will you go?" she asked. Q pointed northwest toward a line of hills barely visible in the distance. "Follow the creek to the big river, then north to the canyon country. 3, maybe 4 days?" Rebecca nodded, trying to memorize the direction in case. In case what? She wasn't sure why she wanted to know, but it seemed important. "Before I go," Q said, reaching into the small bundle of his belongings, "I make something for you." He pulled out a small object made of leather and beads. Rebecca could see that he had worked on it during his recovery, probably during the long hours when she was sleeping or busy with chores. It was beautiful. Thin strips of leather had been braided together to form a bracelet, and small blue and white beads were woven into the pattern. At the center was a tiny carved piece of bone shaped like a feather. "What does it mean?" Rebecca asked as he helped her put it on. "Feather means courage," Q explained. "Blue means loyalty, white means peace." He paused and looked into her eyes. "It means you are friend to the Comanche. You are under protection." Rebecca stared at the bracelet, touched by the gift and the meaning behind it. "Will other Comanche understand this?" "Yes," Q said firmly. "Show this to any of my people, they will know. You helped one of us when you could have let him die." Thank you, Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. I'll treasure it. They stood there for a moment, two people from different worlds, who had found something precious in each other's company. The wind blew across the prairie, carrying the scent of wild grass and distant storms. I must go now, Q said. I know, Rebecca replied. Q shouldered his pack and tested his weight on his injured leg one more time. It held him well. Maybe, he said carefully, maybe someday our peoples will not be enemies. Maybe, Rebecca agreed. Someone has to start somewhere. Yes, Q said with a smile. Someone has to start. He began walking toward the hills, his stride growing stronger with each step. Rebecca watched until he was just a small figure against the vast landscape, then turned and walked back to her cabin. The house felt empty again, but different than before. For 3 days she had shared her space with someone who understood loneliness and loss. Now that understanding would have to sustain her through whatever came next. As she cleaned up the evidence of Q's stay, Rebecca found herself looking often at the bracelet on her wrist. She wondered if she would ever see him again, or if this brief friendship would remain just a memory. She had no way of knowing that in 3 days, that small bracelet would save her life. 3 days had passed since Q left. Rebecca tried to return to her normal routine, but everything felt different now. The silence seemed heavier, the endless prairie looked more lonely. Even her chickens seemed quieter than usual. She found herself touching the leather bracelet on her wrist throughout the day, remembering their conversations and wondering if he had made it safely back to his people. Every time the wind shifted, she half expected to see him walking back across the grassland. On this particular morning, Rebecca was hanging laundry behind her cabin when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her heart immediately started racing. Visitors were rare out here, and people who rode hard usually brought trouble with them. Rebecca quickly gathered up the wet clothes and hurried to the front of her cabin. Through the window, she could see a dust cloud growing larger on the horizon. At least 6 riders, maybe more. She grabbed her husband's rifle from above the fireplace and checked to make sure it was loaded. The weapon felt heavy in her hands. She had never shot at another human being and hoped she wouldn't have to start today. The riders came into clear view as they crested the small hill near her property line. Rebecca's blood turned cold when she recognized the man leading them. Jake. Garrett. Everyone in 3 counties knew that name, and none of them had anything good to say about it. The Garrett gang were rustlers, thieves, and worse. They took what they wanted and left destruction behind them. The law couldn't seem to catch them, because they knew every hiding place between here and Mexico. Rebecca watched through her window as the 6 men rode up to her cabin. They looked exactly like what they were, dangerous men who lived outside the law. Their clothes were dirty, their faces unshaven, and their eyes held the cold look of people who had done terrible things. Jake Garrett himself was a big man with graying hair and scars on his hands that spoke of countless fights. He sat his horse, like someone who was used to being in charge, used to taking whatever he wanted. Rebecca Moore, he called out in a voice that carried across the yard. Come on out here. We need to have ourselves a talk. Rebecca's grip tightened on the rifle. How did he know her name? She had never met any of these men before. I'm fine talking from right here, she called back through the door. Garrett laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Now that ain't very neighborly. We rode a long way to see you. What do you want? Rebecca asked. Want to make you a business proposition? Garrett replied. Gonna make you rich. Rebecca knew better than to believe that. Men like Garrett didn't make other people rich. They made themselves rich by taking from others. Not interested, she said firmly. Now don't be hasty, Garrett said, dismounting from his horse. You ain't even heard what we're offering yet. The other 5 men spread out around the cabin, cutting off any escape routes. Rebecca realized with growing fear that they had done this before. They knew exactly how to trap someone. See, we've been watching this place, Garrett continued, walking slowly toward her door. Nice piece of land you got here. Good water, decent grass. Problem is, a woman alone can't really make proper use of property like this. This is my land. Rebecca said, "My husband and I bought it fair and square." "Oh, I know all about your husband," Garrett said. "Heard he died of fever last year? Sad story. But the thing is, that leaves you out here all alone, trying to work a man's property." Rebecca could hear the threat in his voice even though his words sounded almost friendly. "What we're proposing," Garrett went on, "is that you sign this land over to us. In exchange, we'll give you enough money to get yourself to a nice town somewhere. Maybe find yourself a new husband. And if I refuse?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "Well now," Garrett said, "that would be mighty unfortunate. Lots of dangerous things can happen to a woman living alone out here. Wild animals, fires, raids by hostile Indians. A real shame when accidents happen." Rebecca felt anger rising alongside her fear. These men thought they could just take her home, her husband's legacy, everything she had worked for. "You need to leave," she said loudly. "Right now." "Can't do?" "That," Garrett replied. "See, we've already got buyers lined up for this property. Cattle buyers from back east who don't ask too many questions about how we acquired the land." One of the other men, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "Boss, maybe we should just take what we want and be done with it." "Now, Charlie," Garrett said. "That ain't polite. We're trying to do this the civilized way first." Rebecca could see in their faces that they were losing patience with talk. These men were used to taking what they wanted by force. "I've got a rifle," Rebecca called out, hoping to buy more time. "I'm sure you do," Garrett said. "Question is, can you use it? And even if you can, there's 6 of us and 1 of you. Math ain't exactly in your favor." Rebecca knew he was right, but she wasn't about to give up without a fight. This cabin, this land, it was all she had left of her life with her husband. She would rather die than let these criminals take it. "Tell you what," Garrett said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "I've got a deed transfer right here, all ready to sign. You put your name on this paper and we all ride away peaceful like. No one gets hurt." "Go to hell," Rebecca said. The friendly mask finally slipped from Garrett's face. "Wrong answer, lady." He gestured to his men, and they began moving closer to the cabin. Rebecca could see them checking their weapons and spreading out to surround the building completely. "Last chance," Garrett called out. "Sign the paper or we take the land anyway, and you don't get nothing for it." Rebecca's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. She was trapped, outnumbered, and too far from help. Her nearest neighbor was miles away, and even if she could somehow get word to them, these men would be long gone before help arrived. "You got 1 minute to decide," Garrett said, pulling out his pocket watch. "After that, we start doing things the hard way." Rebecca looked around her cabin one last time. At the table where she and her husband had shared so many meals. At the bed where she had nursed him through his final illness. At the small shelf that held their few precious books. She thought about Kiyu, probably safe with his people by now. She thought about the bracelet on her wrist and what he had said about courage. "Time's up," Garrett announced. Rebecca heard him cock his pistol. "Charlie, go around back," Garrett ordered. "Tom, you and Jake watch the sides. We're going in." Rebecca gripped her rifle tighter and prepared for the fight of her life. She might not win, but she would make them pay dearly for what they took. The sound of boots on her porch told her that her time had run out. What Rebecca didn't know was that help was already on the way. Help in the form of a Comanche war party that had been tracking the Garrett gang for 3 days, ever since they had stolen horses from a settlement near the reservation, and leading that war party was someone who owed Rebecca Moore a debt that could never be repaid. Rebecca heard the first boot step onto her porch and raised her rifle toward the door. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve was firm. She would not go down without a fight. "Easy now, lady," came Garrett's voice from just outside. "Don't do nothing stupid. We just want to talk." But Rebecca could hear the lies in his words. She could hear other footsteps moving around her cabin, surrounding her completely. They weren't here to talk anymore. The door handle turned slowly. Rebecca took aim and held her breath. 1 shot. That's all she would get before they rushed her. Then, cutting through the morning air like a blade, came a sound that made everyone freeze, a war cry. High, piercing, and unmistakably Comanche, Rebecca's heart nearly stopped. Had Kiu's people come for revenge? Had they discovered she had helped him and decided she was a threat? But through her window she could see the faces of Garrett's men, and they looked terrified. These were hard men who feared very little, but the sound of Comanche war cries could strike fear into anyone who lived on the frontier. "What the hell?" Charlie shouted from behind the cabin. More war cries echoed across the prairie, coming from multiple directions. Rebecca realized that the cabin was now surrounded by two different groups, Garrett's gang on one side, and an unknown number of Comanche warriors on the other. "Boss," one of Garrett's men called out, "we got company." Through her front window, Rebecca could see riders appearing on the ridge to the north. Even from a distance, she could tell they were Comanche. They sat their horses with the easy grace of people born to ride, and morning sunlight glinted off their weapons. "How many?" Garrett barked. "I count 12, came the reply. "Maybe more behind the hill." Rebecca watched as Garrett's confidence crumbled. 6 outlaws against 12 Comanche warriors was not good odds, even for men as dangerous as the Garrett gang. "They probably just want the horses," Garrett said, but his voice had lost its earlier certainty. Indians are always looking to steal horses, but Rebecca had a strange feeling this wasn't about horses. Something about the way the warriors had positioned themselves, creating a barrier between the outlaws and her cabin, suggested this was more personal. The Comanche riders began moving down the hill in a line, their horses stepping carefully but steadily forward. They were in no hurry. They had the advantage and they knew it. "We need to get out of here," Charlie said, his voice tight with fear. "Shut up," Garrett snapped. "We can handle a bunch of savages." But Rebecca could see doubt in his eyes. The Comanche had a reputation that even hardened criminals respected. They were fierce fighters who knew this land better than anyone. As the warriors drew closer, Rebecca caught sight of the man leading them. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Q. He looked different than when she had last seen him. Gone were her husband's old clothes. Now he wore traditional Comanche war dress, buckskin leggings, a decorated shirt, and feathers in his long black hair. War paint marked his face in bold stripes of red and black, but it was definitely him. Rebecca could see the way he favored. His right leg slightly, the injury from the trap still affecting his movements just a little. "Rebecca Moore." Q called out in clear English, his voice carrying across the yard. The outlaws looked stunned. How did this Comanche warrior know her name? "You will come out now," Q continued. "You are safe." Garrett spun around to stare at Rebecca's cabin. "You know these Indians?" he shouted. Rebecca's mind raced. How could she explain without making things worse? But before she could answer, Q spoke again. "The woman is under protection of the Comanche," he announced. "Any man who harms her will answer to us." "Like hell," Garrett snarled, but Rebecca could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The other Comanche warriors had spread out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape route to the north or east. They moved with practiced ease, weapons ready but not yet threatening. Rebecca made a decision. Keeping her rifle ready, she slowly opened her cabin door and stepped outside. The sight that greeted her was like something from a story. The Garretts. 6 men stood bunched together near their horses, hands on their weapons but afraid to draw them. The Comanche warriors sat motionless on their mounts, waiting, and in the center of it all was Kiu, looking every inch the warrior chief he was. "Meant to be." "How do you know this savage?" Garrett demanded, his eyes darting between Rebecca and the Comanche. "He's not a savage," Rebecca said firmly, "and that's none of your business." Q urged his horse forward a few steps. "You will leave this place," he said to Garrett. "Now, this is white man's business," Garrett replied, trying to sound brave. "Got nothing to do with you." "The woman helped my people," Q said simply. "Now my people help her." Rebecca saw Garrett's eyes narrow as he tried to figure out what this meant. She could see him weighing his options, calculating whether he could fight his way out. "There's 6 of us," Garrett said, "and we got rifles." "There are 12 of us," Q replied calmly. "And we have something you do not. Yeah? What's that?" We know this land, we know where to hide, we know where you sleep. Q's voice was steady and cold. You can run, but you cannot hide from us. Rebecca watched the fear growing in the outlaws' faces. The Comanche had a reputation for being able to track anyone across hundreds of miles of wilderness. They could appear and disappear like ghosts. Besides, Q continued, you are already wanted men. My brother has been tracking you for 3 days. Your brother? Garrett asked. A new voice spoke from behind the outlaws. Yes, his brother. Everyone turned to see another Comanche warrior emerging from behind the barn. He was older than Q, with broader shoulders and scars that spoke of many battles. This had to be the war chief Q had mentioned. We have been following you since you stole horses from the reservation, the older warrior said in heavily accented English. We were going to take you to the army fort for justice. But now, he looked at Rebecca, then at Q. Now this is personal. Rebecca realized that Garrett's gang had made a fatal mistake. They had threatened someone who was under Comanche protection, and they had done it right in front of a war party that was already hunting them. Look, Garrett said, his voice finally showing real fear. We don't want any trouble with you people. We'll just be moving along. Yes, Q agreed. You will be moving along. But first you will apologize to the woman. Apologize? Garrett's face reddened with anger and humiliation. You came to her home. You threatened her. You tried to steal her land. Q's voice grew harder. In my culture, such behavior requires payment. The other Comanche warriors began moving closer, their horses stepping forward in unison. The outlaws found themselves being herded together like cattle. What kind of payment? Charlie asked nervously. Q looked at Rebecca. What would be fair payment for such insult? Rebecca thought for a moment. She could ask for their weapons, their horses, even their lives. The Comanche would probably be willing to provide any of those things, but she remembered her husband's words about ending wars instead of fighting them. I want them gone, she said finally. Gone and never coming back. And I want them to spread the word that this land is protected. Q nodded approvingly. Wise choice? He turned back to Garrett. You hear the woman's words. You will leave. You will not return. And you will tell all other men like you that this place is sacred to the Comanche? Sacred? Garrett asked. The woman saved the life of a warrior, Q explained. God makes this place blessed. Anyone who brings harm here brings curse upon themselves. Rebecca had to admire Q's cleverness. By making her property sacred in the eyes of his people, he was ensuring that she would be protected long after he was gone. Now go, Q's brother commanded, before we change our minds about letting you live. The outlaws didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled for their horses and rode out fast. Not looking back once, Rebecca watched them disappear over the hill, hardly believing what had just happened. She was safe, and she owed it all to a wounded warrior she had found in a trap just 1 week ago. For several long moments after the dust settled from the outlaws' hasty retreat, nobody moved. Rebecca stood on her porch, still gripping her rifle, hardly believing what had just happened. The Comanche warriors remained motionless on their horses, watching the horizon to make sure Garrett's gang was really gone. Q was the first to break the silence. He dismounted from his horse and walked slowly toward Rebecca, favoring his injured leg just slightly. The war paint on his face made him look fierce, but his eyes held the same kindness she remembered. Are you hurt? He asked in English. Rebecca shook her head. No, thanks to you. She paused, looking at him and then at the other warriors. But how did you know I was in trouble? Q's brother, the war chief, answered from his horse. We tracked these men for 3 days. They steal horses from reservation. When we see them come this way, he gestured toward Q. My brothers say we must follow. You were tracking them anyway, Rebecca said, understanding dawning on her face. Yes, Q confirmed. But when I see where they go, I know they come for you. Bad men like these, they always want what others have. Rebecca felt a chill run through her. If Q and his war party hadn't been following the horse thieves, she would have faced Garrett's gang alone. She probably wouldn't have survived. The One called Garrett, Q's brother said, still watching the distant horizon. He is known to us. He has done bad things before. What kind of bad things? Rebecca asked. The war chief's face grew dark. He steal from anyone. White, Mexican, Indian. He killed 2 traders last winter, take their goods and horses. Rebecca shuddered. She had been dealing with cold-blooded killers, not just land grabbers. Why didn't the law catch them? She asked. Q snorted. Law does not care about Indian problems. When they steal from white men only, then maybe law will come. Rebecca knew he was right. The frontier justice system barely functioned in the best of times, and crimes against Native Americans were rarely investigated seriously. But today, the war chief said with satisfaction, they learn that some wrongs have consequences. As if, summoned by his words, a dust cloud appeared on the southern horizon. Rebecca's heart sank, thinking Garrett's gang might be coming back with reinforcements, but Q was studying the approaching riders with calm eyes. Not them, he said. Different horses. Different way of riding. As the new riders came closer, Rebecca could see he was right. These men rode in formation, not the scattered group that outlaws would form, and they were coming from the wrong direction. Soldiers, one of the Comanche warriors called out in his native language. Rebecca felt a new kind of fear rising in her chest. If the army found a Comanche war party on her property, they might not stop to ask questions first. You need to go, she said urgently to Q. If they see you here ... We know, Q's brother replied calmly, but we not afraid of soldiers. You should be, Rebecca said. They won't understand why you're here. Q looked at the approaching cavalry unit, then back at Rebecca. You want us to leave? Rebecca was torn. These men had just saved her life, and now she was asking them to put themselves in danger by staying or risk capture by leaving too slowly. I want you to be safe, she said finally. Q smiled at that. You still worry about us, even now. The soldiers were close enough now that Rebecca could count them. 8 men in blue uniforms, led by a young officer who looked like he had never seen real combat. We could fight them, one of the younger Comanche warriors said in English. No, Q's brother said firmly. No fighting today. We came to help, not to start war. Then what do we do? Rebecca asked. Q thought for a moment, then made a decision. We talk to them, tell truth. They won't believe the truth, Rebecca said. Maybe not, Q agreed. But running makes us look guilty. The cavalry unit rode into Rebecca's yard and formed a line facing the Comanche warriors. The young lieutenant in charge looked nervous but determined to do his duty. I'm Lieutenant Morrison, he announced in a loud voice. You Indians need to move along. This is private property. We know whose property this is, Q's brother replied calmly. We are guests of the woman. Lieutenant Morrison looked confused. He glanced at Rebecca, then back at the war party. Ma'am, are these Indians bothering you? Rebecca found herself at a crossroads. She could lie, tell the soldiers that the Comanche were threatening her and watch them all get arrested or killed. Or she could tell the truth and risk her own reputation. She thought about Q lying in her cabin, trusting her to heal him. She thought about the gift he had made for her still on her wrist. She thought about how he had risked his own safety. To save hers, no, Lieutenant, she said clearly. They're not bothering me. They just saved my life. Morrison's eyebrows shot up. Saved your life? The Garrett gang was here, Rebecca explained. They were trying to force me to sign over my land. These men drove them off. The Garrett gang? Morrison's attitude changed immediately. Jake Garrett was wanted by the army for multiple crimes. They were here? About 30 minutes ago, Rebecca confirmed. They rode south when the Comanche arrived. Morrison turned to his sergeant. Matthews, take 4 men and scout south. See if you can pick up their trail. Yes, sir, the sergeant replied, and half the unit rode off in pursuit. Now then, Morrison said, turning back to the Comanche. You men are supposed to be on the reservation. We have permission, Q's brother said, pulling out a folded paper. We track stolen horses. Army officer at fort give us permission to follow thieves. Morrison examined the paper carefully. Rebecca could see his confusion growing as he tried to understand the situation. "So you were tracking the Garrett gang?" he asked. "Yes," Q confirmed. "They steal horses from our people 3 days ago." "And you just happened to arrive here when they were threatening this lady?" "Not happened," Q said. "We see them come this way. My brother and I, we know. This woman, she helped our people before." Morrison looked back and forth between them, clearly struggling to understand how a white homesteader woman could be friends with a Comanche war party. "Ma'am," he said finally, "can you explain this?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "A week ago, I found one of their warriors caught in a trap. He was badly hurt. I helped him heal. You helped a Comanche warrior?" Morrison asked, his voice rising. "I helped a human being who was suffering," Rebecca corrected him. Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Rebecca could see him trying to decide if she was brave, foolish, or treasonous. "And now they consider you under their protection?" he asked. "Apparently so," Rebecca said. The lieutenant looked around at the Comanche warriors, all of whom sat their horses with calm dignity. These weren't raiders or troublemakers. They were men who had ridden hard to help someone in need. "Well," Morrison said finally, "I guess that makes you about the safest woman in Texas." Q's brother actually smiled at that. "She is safe," he agreed. "Very safe." Morrison shook his head in amazement. "Ma'am, you've done something I've never seen before. You've made allies out of enemies." "Maybe," Rebecca said. "That's what this country needs more of." The young lieutenant nodded slowly. "Maybe it is." In the distance, they could hear the sound of the soldiers returning. Sergeant Matthews rode up with a grim expression. "Trail goes cold at the river, sir," he reported. "But we found this." He held up a hat that Rebecca recognized as belonging to one of Garrett's men. "At least we know which way they went," Morrison said. He turned to the Comanche. "You men are free to go, and ... Thank you for helping Mrs. Moore." Q's brother nodded formally. "It was our honor." As the soldiers prepared to continue their pursuit of the outlaws, Rebecca realized that something remarkable had just happened. For a few minutes, soldiers and Comanche warriors had stood together in peace, united by a common cause. Maybe there was hope for this troubled land after all. As the dust from the departing cavalry settled, an unusual quiet fell over Rebecca's homestead. The soldiers had ridden south in pursuit of the Garrett gang, and now only she and the Comanche warriors remained in the afternoon sun. Rebecca looked around at the 12 mounted men who had just saved her life. A week ago, she would have been terrified to find herself alone with them. Now, she felt safer than she had in months. Q dismounted and walked over to her, his brother following close behind. The war paint on their faces was starting to streak with sweat, making them look more human and less fearsome. "You told the soldiers the truth," Q said. "Even though it could bring you trouble, it was the truth," Rebecca replied simply. "You did save my life." Q's brother studied her with intelligent eyes. "Most white people would have lied, would have said we threatened you." "I'm not most white people," Rebecca said. The war chief smiled at that. "No, you are not." He dismounted as well and approached her. "I am called Nahali. I lead this band." "I'm honored to meet you," Rebecca said, meaning it. Nahali nodded approvingly. "My brother tells me you risked much to help him. This is not forgotten." "Anyone would have done the same," Rebecca said. "No," Nahali said firmly, "not anyone." "Most would have left him to die, or turned him over to bounty hunters for money." Rebecca thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe what had seemed like simple human decency to her was actually rarer than she realized. "In our culture," Nahali continued, "when someone saves a life, a debt is created. This debt can never be fully repaid, but it must always be honored." "You don't owe me anything," Rebecca said. "I helped because it was the right thing to do." "And, we helped you today for the same reason," Q said. "But also because of the debt?" One of the younger warriors spoke up in Comanche, and Nahali listened, then nodded. "He asks why you were not afraid of us when we arrived," Nahali translated. "Most white women would have run inside and barred the door." Rebecca considered the question. I suppose because Kiyu taught me that you're people just like me. You have families, fears, hopes. You're not the monsters some people say you are. The young warrior listened to the translation and said something else, which made several of the others chuckle. He says you are wiser than most white leaders? Nahali explained with amusement. As the afternoon wore on, Rebecca found herself in the strange position of hosting a Comanche war party. She brought out water for them and their horses, and they shared some of their trail food with her. Through Q and Nahali, who both spoke good English, she learned about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. They told her about the reservation, about the promises made and broken by the government, about trying to preserve their way of life in a world that was changing too fast. In return, she told them about her own struggles, the loneliness of frontier life, the challenges of working the land alone, the fear of men like Garrett who saw her as easy prey. You should not have to face such things alone, Nahali said thoughtfully. It's the life I chose, Rebecca replied. Or maybe it chose me. Q had been quiet during much of this conversation, but now he spoke up. There is something we must discuss, something important. Rebecca looked at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. The men who threatened you today, they will not forget what happened here, Q continued. They will remember that the Comanche protected you. This may bring more danger. Rebecca's heart sank. She hadn't thought of that. Other outlaws might see her as a target now, hoping to draw the Comanche into a fight. What are you saying? She asked. Nahale answered. We are saying that we cannot protect you if we do not know you are in danger. We cannot be here always. I understand, Rebecca said. I'll be careful, more than careful, Q said. He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small object. We leave you this. It was a piece of polished metal, shaped like an arrowhead and attached to a leather cord. The surface was decorated with symbols that looked like they had been painted with red clay. What is it? Rebecca asked. Signal mirror, Nahali explained. If you are in danger, you hold this up to catch the sun, flash it 3 times, then 3 times again, then 3 times once more. If any of our people are within 10 miles, they will see it and come. Rebecca took the mirror with trembling hands. You would do that? Come running every time I signal? Life. Debt, Q said simply, and more than that now. Your family. The word hit Rebecca harder than she expected. Family. She had been alone for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have people who would come when she called. How? Will your people know it's from me? She asked. Nahali pointed to the symbols on the mirror. These marks tell them. They say friend of Q, protected one, sacred helper, and all your people will understand this? All our people, and the people of Eladi Ben Fahali confirmed. The story of what you did will spread. Many will know your name. Rebecca looked around at the faces surrounding her. These men had risked their own safety to help her, and now they were offering her protection that could last for years. Why? She asked. Why all this for one small act of kindness? Q exchanged a look with his brother, then spoke carefully. Our people are dying, not just from war, but from forgetting who we are. When we see someone like you, someone who still knows how to be human, it gives us hope. Hope for what? Hope that maybe our children and your children will not have to be enemies, Nahali said. Hope that someday people will be judged by their hearts, not by the color of their skin. Rebecca felt tears welling up in her eyes. That's a beautiful dream. Dreams must start somewhere, Q said. Maybe they start with a woman who finds a wounded warrior and chooses to heal instead of hate. As the sun began to set, the Comanche warriors prepared to leave. They had to return to the reservation before their absence was noticed by the wrong people. Will I see you again? Rebecca asked Q as he mounted his horse. Perhaps, he said, with a smile. But even if you do not, you will never be alone. You have family now, scattered across the plains. Remember that, Nahali rode up beside his brother. Use the mirror only when you truly need help, he cautioned. But do not hesitate to use it if danger comes. I won't, Rebecca promised, One by one, the warriors rode past her, each nodding respectfully as they passed. The young warrior who had asked about her lack of fear stopped his horse and said something in Comanche. "He says you have the heart of a warrior," Nahali translated. High praise from one so young. Rebecca watched them ride away into the growing darkness, their figures becoming shadows against the vast prairie sky. Soon they were gone, leaving only the memory of their presence, and the warm weight of the signal mirror in her hand. Standing alone on her porch, Rebecca felt different than she had that morning. She was still the same woman, in the same place, facing the same challenges, but now she was part of something larger. Part of a story that might be told around campfires for generations to come. The story of how one act of compassion created bonds that transcended hatred and fear. The story of how a woman's courage to see humanity in an enemy changed lives on both sides of an ancient conflict. The story of how sometimes the smallest gestures can plant seeds for the biggest changes. Rebecca touched the bracelet on her wrist, then the mirror in her other hand. Two gifts from a people she had been taught to fear, now symbols of the most unlikely friendship. As she went inside and prepared for sleep, Rebecca realized that for the first time since her husband's death, she felt truly safe. Not because she had weapons or walls to protect her, but because she had something much more powerful. She had family. And in a world torn by hatred and violence, that was worth everything.